All right, so we're trying a new microphone. We'll see what happens here. So this is all about that idea of managing risk in our project. We manage risk in our own lives all the time. We make decisions. We say, oh, I'm not going to take a motorcycle down the dirt road because that looks really dangerous. Oh my goodness, I'm not going to walk across this scary bridge railing because I might fall in the river. You know, all these different kinds of things. We manage risk. Well, in our projects, we also want to have risk management. And when we do that, we're really looking to see what things are going to affect our project, what are most likely to affect our project, and what kind of things do we need to worry about. And we start at the beginning. So we start looking at it in terms of kind of that desktop planning, what could happen. We continue it all the way through the project because sometimes things change. And we go, oh, I hadn't even thought about that as a risk. So those lessons learned. And then when we do another project, now we have that inventory of things that can go wrong. So here in this example, and this is in your book, there's an information system for a clinic. So we know these kinds of things they have to have in there. So they're going to have to make notes, and it's going to have admission information and a diagnosis and ICD-10 codes and what the doctors have decided about you, and most importantly for the doctor's office, that financial information so they can get paid, right? So are there some risks in this? So I'm going to bring out at a medical clinic a brand new system. So they list some, but I'm going to say that there's probably some other ones that are going to be in there. So one of the biggest ones in something like this is, if I don't have a champion, so I'm a small medical clinic with a couple of doctors, if I don't have one of those doctors pushing for this, am I going to be successful? If the primary users are not interested in doing this, am I going to be successful? And something like this maybe has required, and they have to implement it, well, they're not going to be very excited. So are we going to have commitment from management? Well, not if they're not also on board with this idea. We might also have all of the staff saying, man, this is really not very useful. We may not understand why we're doing it. So there's a federal mandate, but we're a small clinic. Why the heck are we doing that? And it may change how we do things. So, and I've run into this actually in the medical field. Every doctor thinks that they are a god. Have you ever been to a doctor that didn't think that they were a god? No, they are the king of their little kingdom. They want to let you know that everything in there is their responsibility. Well, something like an information system challenges that. Because what we found is that procedural-based medicine, so where it actually examines all the facts, can sometimes lead to better outcomes than that first guess of a doctor when they walk in the door. Because doctors are not immune to bias. When you walk in and they think you're a meth user, everything's going to be tied to being a meth user. When you walk in like I do and I'm fat, everything is related to the fact, my finger's broken, doc. Let's go, you're fat. Lose weight and come back in a year. They have biases too. So there is that reality of what we need to do. So all of those are risks that come from some of these ideas when we're implementing something like an information system. So there's a lot of other risks, and we just barely broached the surface. There's certainly financial risks. So there's financial risk if we don't because the federal government's going to fine us. There's financial risk because maybe it screws up our patient billing information, or it screws up our ability to bill insurance companies, which is a big issue. So there's a lot of different risks. So at the very beginning of our project, once we kind of have an idea where we're at, we typically have kind of a brainstorming session. And we start looking about what could be risks in that. So if I do that right now in here. So our construction project is to re-sheetrock and repaint this room and recarpet it. That's our project. What kind of risks could we have in there? So I'm going to throw them up on the board. What kind of risk could we have? We're going to paint. So we're going to patch the walls, paint, put new carpet in. What kind of risks do we have? What could go wrong? Oh, you guys are all quiet. What could go wrong in there? So So that's certainly an issue. And then we would have a financial cost because we'd have to repaint it. So paint wrong color.
Maybe like someone fell when they were painting.
So injury. So maybe we noticed that they brought in an old wooden ladder from 1971. Would that cause us to think about injury? Or they're not trained on how to step on a ladder? What about injury from things like paint fumes or carpet glue or those kinds of things? Could that be possible? Yeah, that could all trip us up. What about timeline? If our project takes far longer than we anticipate, could that timeline affect us? So maybe we're trying to do it over the summer and we don't get it done in time. What are we going to do with all the students that are supposed to be in here? What if we have a employee that paints all the windows too? Could that happen? Yeah. What if we have an employee in our company truck and they decide, I'm on the way to work, so I'm going to get a couple 45s on the way. And they're drinking some malt 45 liquor or whatever on the way down here. Or, shots of tequila on the way down or whatever it is. They have a crash. Is that going to affect our project? We have a daycare on site. Here's a really horrific vision. What if we hire a sex offender? So background checks would be the way to mitigate at least a previous history. Now the problem is we can't always predict what people are going to do in the future. What about if we have a crew of men and women? Can we have sexual harassment claims? Could we have that? Does that ever happen at a construction site? Yeah. Men are sometimes pigs. Well, I would tell you this. Sometimes women are the same way. Can it be a sexual harassment claim? What if we're all one sex? Could there be sexual harassment? All different kinds of things. So even though we think, hey, it's just painting a room and putting in some carpet, what if we come in here and the carpet installer goes, I need to hit this with a hammer, hits it, and the floor caves in, and now there's an 8-foot hole in the center of the floor into the basement. Things have happened. Strange things have happened. So what I want to do in the beginning of this is we look at what can stop this project, what are our sources of risk, so we kind of try to categorize them. We look at previous projects, what's happened before. All right, so we had a project and Jim drove the bus into the building. Well, that didn't go so well. So as we get more information, so as we do more projects, we start seeing more and more and more things that happen. So maybe it's not sexual harassment between employees, but we have an employee that goes out and smacks the butt of a young female. Is that going to cause an issue? Yeah. We had. I can't tell you that one. Never mind. I can't tell you about that story yet. But so one of the things that you also want to do is you're going to determine how likely one of these events is. So, hitting the floor with a hammer once and an 8-foot hole develops. Is that very likely? Well, let's hope that the building's stronger than that, right? On the other hand, putting on the wrong paint color, what's the likelihood of that? So we can scale these. For example, if we used a 1 through 10 scale, we could say paint wrong color. Ooh, we've done that before. It's an 8. And maybe it's not even that it's the wrong color. It's not the color the client thinks it is, but it falls on our ears. Injury, we know that maybe 4 out of 10 projects have somebody that gets injured. So we can start assigning then, based on what priority, well, we're going to respond to those. Maybe we hire really carefully, and so harassment claim, we've never had one, so we're going to say that's a 1. We don't think it'll ever happen, but, sometimes people will sue for strange reasons. So we're going to leave it on there, but we don't think it's going to happen. So we come up with an idea. So here's that idea of on a risk assessment. So here's actually for the wedding that we talked about earlier. Rain on the day of an event. Well, what is its impact? Low attendance, financial loss. likelihood of occurrence. So they broke it down into 3 categories. And then you can say, what do we do if it happens? Who's responsible? And also what we can do for a response plan. So, paint's the wrong color. Response plan, we meet with the client to determine what we need to do. Is it the paint vendor's fault? Did they mix the wrong color? Did the client select a color based off a tiny paint chip and then surprised when the entire room didn't look like they thought? So how do we determine what's going on? And then we have a response plan, some way to correct that. A harassment claim. Well, I get an employee that's accused of harassing a student. Do I leave him on the job, or do I immediately pull him from that job and throw him in an office somewhere? Yeah, I'm going to throw him somewhere because I need to investigate that. I'm not going to leave him on site. Now, it may not be that that's actual reality, but I want to make sure that I implement an action plan. So we have a lot of these kinds of things that you can think about for your assignment this week. So, actions. What can we do to either prevent, and then if it happens, what can we do to mitigate that risk? So it's already happened, now we have to deal with it. So we assign some responsibility. So we can do that. We know that some things are going to happen. If you're planning an outdoor wedding, is there a chance it's going to rain? Yeah. So we know that it's going to have a chance of rain. So do we move our beautiful outdoor wedding to just say, well, we're going to just get married inside? Or do we know that these things might happen and we come up with an alternative plan? The other one that we need to a lot of times look at is, do we have funding for those costs? So, in the case of our car accident, most of us don't have $50,000 in our pocket. If any of you do, we need to talk and I will mug you after class. So we use insurance as a contingency fund as a way to mitigate that cost to us. And really what you're doing then, the insurance company pays the $50,000 and then over the next 10 years you pay back to the insurance company, right? So there are a lot of responses that we can do in here. So in our building project for painting, we may have a bond fund that we've agreed to, and they'll bring somebody else in to actually do that. So I want to look at ways that we can control and monitor risks on a project. So these are not all of them. These are just a few suggestions. So every project should have a risk response plan. We need to go over that plan. And we need to evaluate, are there additional risks? Has something changed? So if our outdoor wedding was originally planned for May, but now COVID has moved it to August, does that change the risk for rain? Yeah. So we discuss things. We don't hide them. We discuss them in project management meetings and look at those new risks. Maybe some risks have walked off and we don't need to worry about them anymore, whereas we have new risks that we need to add. So all of this needs to be documented and have a reasonable plan for dealing with it. Reasonable means we actually do something. Unreasonable means we just go, well, I can't, no, crap happens. Well, that doesn't really help us. So there are at least 7 different categories that you can break risk into. Technology, human, usability, team risk, project risk, organizational risk, strategic risk. There are a lot of different ways we can break that down into categories. So, technology risk, we're painting this room and we're using an electrical sprayer. That sprayer dies, we don't have a replacement, we have to paint it by hand. That's a risk. We have human risk. People do dumb things all the time. So, we're going to break down risk into groups and start looking at how we can do this a little more effectively. So, this chart will be your friend on the assignment for this, well, it's due on October 31st. It is another team group assignment. So here, this might kind of help you look at that. So here we have lack of cooperation and commitment. Well, what does that lead to? Incorrect sales records, likelihood of occurrence, low, medium, high. Medium, what's the degree of impact? Very high. So we have to look at what's going to happen. Sales staff have difficulty using the system. Who's responsible and what's the plan to fix that? We're going to have issues. We just need to figure out when and what we can do with it. We are never going to be risk-free in anything we do. But we have to make those decisions about whether it's an acceptable risk and how we deal with it. So part of those success factors are, have we identified all the risks, or nearly all of them? What about their potential impacts? Have we assigned resources to deal with them? So if we know risks are very likely, then we need to probably address that. So if we know that a really high risk in this building is the bobcats in the basement coming up and knocking over your paint cans, we need to figure out a plan to address that. Well, that makes sense. The more likely something is to happen, the more we need to establish a priority for it. Now, the other side of that, though, is if it's a risk very likely to happen, but the impact is minor, we may have a different outcome. So we may need to think about that a little differently. And one of the ways we do this is try to quantify everything. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So in your blackboard, let me see if I can do this without overwhelming the microphone. So, somewhere down, out of sight. So in week this 9 and 10, there is something here called a risk matrix. So this risk matrix, when I open it for the 900th time, is just a, come on, there we go. So this risk matrix actually puts something in and says, all right, what's our risk classification? So that's where we list them by those 7 different items. So if maybe this is a technology risk. Oh, enable editing because, Microsoft said it's safe now. So maybe this is a technology risk. And maybe it's the paint sprayer. Now, impact severity. So one of the things we will want to do is we're going to say, in this case, are we going to use a scale like a Likert 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10? I prefer kind of the 1 to 10 ratio. So I have a lot of gradations in that impact. So I'm going to say that impact severity is probably a 7. The paint sprayer breaking. How many of you have ever used a paint sprayer before? Did it break a lot?
Clogged more than broke.
So maybe we use clogged. Let's do that. So impact is a 7. The probability, I'm going to say that's probably an 8 out of a 10. And then we have this risk score. Well, we simply multiply those two numbers together to get a score. Then we put in our response plan, who's responsible, and what kind of timeline effects it's going to have. So maybe we have another one for person. We'll put it in a category, and we have harass a student. What is that impact of that severity? I'm going to say in that case, with a college, would that be a 10? But I also know that it's not very likely. So I'm going to say a 3, and that's going to give me a score of 30. I come down and I do another one, and I say, well, what other risks do I have? So I'm going to just say maybe the floor caving in. Impact severity. I'm going to also say that's a 10. But now, I'm going to say, well, let me look at that. What is the risk probability? And we had an engineer come in and they did some kind of look at the floor, and they said there's about a 40% chance it's going to cave in. Or a 4 for a 40. So we have a score of 40 here. When I start looking at these then, I can reorganize them, and Excel has some great tools to do that under the data tools, that I can sort these based on that item here and go highest to lowest. So right now, I would have to flip around a couple of these, but right now the thing that has the most impact on us, the thing we need to work on the most is the paint sprayer. The next one might be the floor cave-in terms of resources, so we're going to prioritize those. Well, let's say we also had one for a leaf blow-in issue. And that impact is 2, and its risk probability is 2, and it's got a score of 4. So obviously we're going to put that at the bottom of our list. Maybe our response plan is to just ignore it and sweep out if we need to. So we can organize these by their risk score. And so that's what this worksheet is set up to do. And then, like I said, you can actually then reiterate those. So here's actually some risk classification. So notice this last is a little different. It lists 8 different items. There are probably as many different types of classifications as you can imagine. This one I think is a little better, but it's not necessarily the definitive list. And so you could create your own. You'd want to identify those categories. And then they use 1 through 5. I like 1 through 10 just because it's easy to say, I have a 70% chance, so that's a 7. So risk probability. So here they've just assigned it, less than 10%, 10 to 25, 25 to 50. Well, that's why I like using a 1 to 10 scale, because it gives me that probability right away. So this gives us all the pieces we need. Now you can certainly do a 1 through 5. It works the same way. I just can't compare 2 items directly because I have 2 different scales. So that is this risk matrix. So when you look at, come back here, Blackboard. So, close the 101. You guys don't need that one. Too many windows open. There we go. All right. So, if you read through here, so read chapter 8, there is a quiz. There is an animation and an animation quiz. There's a project risk decision time. We will try to next week to probably look at a couple of those in class. This risk matrix is right here. And then as a group, you need to pick one of these 3 cases. So I have the Deepwater Horizon. It's easy being green or info pointer active, the final version of that. So these are all PDF files or doc files that have a story, a word problem essentially. And so you're going to go through those and pick one, and you are then going to create a risk matrix assignment. You're going to create this assignment based on this, and you have to do, I think it's 20 I said in here, with a minimum of 20 different items. And you're going to find that seems like a lot, but as soon as you start reading the case and you start trying to break down those and have a brainstorm, you're going to find it happens pretty quickly. So a couple of these you probably remember. The Deepwater Horizon, hopefully you remember from when you were in grade school or something. But so these are a couple of cases, and we're going to look at those, how they function. All right, so for next week, you need to read this chapter. That would be really, really good. Start thinking about risk. I am not going to probably show this one in class, so I would look at that risk management video. Again, one of those by projectmanagement.com. I would probably wait till the last minute to take the quiz, because obviously we're going to talk about a lot of those pieces. And we will, I believe, have enough time to do these in class. So we're also going to do some additional risk assessment. And then as a group, you're going to have this assignment here. So you will need to get with your group and figure out which one of these 3 you're going to do and start on that in sections. So in addition to that group work, there will be 2 items you will have to complete. You're going to complete a self-evaluation check, and then you're actually going to create an evaluation check for all of your team members. And that way we can see if you're participating, if others are participating, and then I scale those grades based on both of those documents. So if there's somebody not participating in your team, don't tell me that they are. That's not really fair to you. You've done the work. and other people might not have. So you will probably want to reach out as soon as possible, because when I looked at people talking about communication in their groups, it seems kind of a broken process. So for lack of a better word. So you might want to think about some of those tools that we had in our discussion board a long time ago about different things. So there is not a discussion board for this week. There is this tool that, not a lot of people participated in. So only 3 out of the 5 groups participated for tools for virtual teams. So you may want to look at that. All right.